Tonight, an immigrant who went on to become one of our most respected secretaries of state. Dr. Henry Kissinger is here, and later, America's Secretary of Weather, Willard Scott. Stay with us. He's been out of the public eye in terms of public service for almost 20 years, but he's very respected and every world leader comes to see him. He has a private business now. He's one of the most celebrated and accomplished men, and imitated men by comedians for some reason, in terms of his voice. Secretary of State. He won the Nobel Prize for his efforts to bring peace in Vietnam, was a leader in opening informal relations with China. Among his long list of other distinctions, he was a professor, or is a professor, I guess.
Was a professor.
Was a professor. Do you keep that for life? Do you get to stay a professor once you're hooked in? Is it sort of like welfare, Henry?
No, you keep it if you stay on the faculty.
I see.
And now, under the new retirement rules, they can't make a retirement age anymore. I don't know why.
Because
but I'm no longer on the faculty, so it doesn't apply to me.
You can't run for president if you were born outside the United States. You came here when you were about 15. If you had been born here, would you have run for president at some point?
Almost certainly.
Yes?
I would have tried.
You would have. Why did you not run for anything else? Because there was talk about you for a long time.
Well, I was thinking of running for the Senate. I think it was 1980.
Right.
In Senator Chavitz's
right.
last campaign. And if Senator Chavez had retired, I would have run. But I didn't want to take it away from him, assuming I could have in a primary fight.
Didn't bother Al D'Amato.
No, but Chavez was a friend of mine.
Right.
And the Senate seat meant a lot to him.
Right.
And I would have been honored to be senator, but I didn't want to do it at that price.
Mm-hmm. I have so much to talk with you about. So I'm going to skip around like a guy who's had a brain operation on a credit card. But let me start with, are we under any nuclear threat in America today? I mean, it's sort of, nobody talks about it anymore because the Soviet Union sort of disintegrated.
Well, it's a strange situation in the sense that during the Cold War, we were under a specific nuclear threat. We knew the numbers of weapons, more or less, that the Soviet Union had, and they had the capacity to destroy us. Now, strangely enough, the Soviet Union still has most of the weapons it had during the Cold War and still could do it, but we don't assume that they would have the will to do it, and I think that's right. But at the same time, more nuclear powers are coming into being. So while the sort of devastating attack that the Soviet Union could launch is no longer likely, the danger of some fanatic or some third country launching it at some point is increasing.
Who has nuclear weapons that we don't even know about? Does Muammar Gaddafi have a nuclear weapon?
I don't think so, but it's not so hard to get nuclear weapons anymore. India has nuclear weapons. Pakistan has nuclear weapons, almost certainly.
I think they have a catalog. You ever get does your wife shop in these catalogs? You get 100 catalogs at the apartment? We're going to have a nuclear weapon catalog pretty soon. I mean,
North Korea has nuclear weapons.
Or should we fear them? Is that the biggest threat we have today?
Well, the threat of North Korean nuclear weapons is that it makes it much more likely that Japan will get nuclear weapons, because the technology that North Korea is using in a rudimentary way, Japan has in a sophisticated way. North Korea has maybe, I think, 2 nuclear reactors. Japan has 25 of that kind. And while they have not yet converted them to nuclear weapons, the plutonium to nuclear weapons, they could easily do so. And I think they have it in the back of their mind.
Is this deal with the North Korea that Bill Clinton put together that everybody sort of quieted down about, is that a real deal, or do we still have something to fear?
I am very uneasy about it because, for a number of reasons. First, we said that they had violated their agreement on the Non-Proliferation Treaty.
Right.
We said if they don't allow inspections, if they don't abolish the nuclear program, we will impose sanctions. Then we walk right up to it, and we don't impose sanctions.
Right.
And we make an agreement whereby for the next 5 or 6 years, we give them $100 million worth of oil a year. We're going to build a $4 billion worth of nuclear reactors of a less dangerous but still not negligible capacity, after which they have agreed to let us inspect in very ambiguous language. And all we are gaining is that in the intervening 5 years, they are not adding to their nuclear capacity, but they're preserving the nuclear material they have already illegally produced. So if you look at it from the point of view of South Korea, from the point of view of Japan, we have sort of acquiesced in North Korea remaining a nuclear power.
So in other words, North Korea is a nuclear power. They have weapons. They don't have a thrust. They couldn't...
Well, they have, to be precise, it is generally assumed that they have one or two, and they have nuclear materials from which they could fashion 7 or 8 more.
Do we know where they are specifically? I mean, could we go in and airstrike them?
We don't know where the 2 weapons are, but we know where the material is from which they could build 8 more. But that they're preserving, that they're not giving up. So
we're paying them $100 million to remain a nuclear power, is what I'm hearing.
We're paying them $100 million not to add to stuff they've already illegally produced, but preserving the stuff they've illegally produced so that whenever...
But we have no way of telling whether they're going to keep their side of the bargain, and there's a history of not keeping it.
We can tell whether they're keeping this side of the bargain that they're not producing anymore, but we have no way of knowing whether in 5 years they won't tell us to go to hell. And they're not supposed to use the oil we're delivering for military or quasi-military purposes, and they've already violated that.
They have violated.
Yeah.
Does the media just not care about that? They don't report it? I didn't read that they violated it already.
Well, they report it, but on page 20 of...
right.
It's not consistently reported.
Right. That gets me to the media. A 19th century etiquette book said it's improper to kick a newspaper man down the stairs simply because he has chosen to make his living in a disagreeable manner. So I guess the press has been a thorn in the side of public officials. General Grant during the Civil War wanted to shoot the reporters because he said they were all spies. What is your general view of how the media covers active government and politics in America today?
Well, I think there has been a big change in the last 20 years. Until the end of the 60s, I think until the Vietnam War, the newspapers reported, often critically, but they did not make the news. They reported the news. Starting in the late 60s, early 70s, and accelerating since, the media have had an incentive to be participants in making the news, to create stories that they could exploit. When I came to Washington over 20 years ago, now 25 years ago, there were a number of senior journalists. There were a lot of hacks, but there were a number of senior journalists who set the standards, who knew a lot about the subjects I knew something about and to whom you could talk. Today, they really don't care so much about the substance. They care about the angle they can use. And this is compounded by television, where you can't cover things in great detail anyway. And so every public official, which I'm no longer, but he lives under the threat of some inadvertent statement that he then has to justify for weeks, and then it blows up and goes away again. So there's no...
Meanwhile, while they're covering that, they're not covering what's really happening.
There is no easy forum to cover for the relationship of events to each other. And the spectacular gets reported, but the underlying meaning, the causes, the trends, they have no easy constituency.
Does the press like you, or do they not like you? They're still angry at you about Vietnam?
Well, I can't complain on the whole. If I look at the whole body of the press, I can't complain personally about the press. There is one contingent that is fighting the Vietnam War according to the categories they established 30 years ago. And they'll never change them. And they'll never admit that when they were laughing at us when we said there'll be a bloodbath. There was a bloodbath, a worse one than we even imagined. they rarely come forward. And
Is it accurate to say that Jack Kennedy put in like 26,000 troops, Lyndon Johnson put in another 500,000 troops? Then when Richard Nixon was elected in 1968, the war escalated to end it, but we began withdrawing troops, and by the time Nixon left office, the troops were out.
That's correct.
That is correct.
Richard Nixon inherited 550,000 troops, and he began withdrawing them within 6 months of coming into office at the rate of about 150,000 a year. Every once in a while, he lashed out to back off our adversaries, but to remove 500,000 troops without a catastrophe
I have to take a break
was
here.
not easy.
We will be right back with Dr. Henry Kissinger, one of the smartest guys I know, and we both eat at the same place. We eat at the Four Seasons here in New York. Stay with us. Did you read the biography of him that his personal hygiene was a little weak? Mouse.
Yeah, there were some parts of it which I knew not to be true.
Really?
But for example, you mean the doctor?
Yeah, the doctor wrote his personal mousy tongues.
The only two things I can talk about is the doctor claimed that we had brought respiration equipment to Mao or other medical equipment. That's absolutely not true.
Not true.
We were never asked and we were never supplied it. And the second is he claimed that on his deathbed, Mao asked him a question of whether he was going to live or something like that, and he reassured him and he smiled. That's unlikely because the last year of his life, Mao could not speak. He was sort of croaking. Mm-hmm. And when I saw him about 6 months before he died, he was croaking, and then some Chinese would write out what he thought he had said and showed it to him.
Sort of the Bill Casey syndrome.
Really, he was.
It's Bob Woodward.
He showed him, and then he'd nod his head or shake his head.
I talked to George Bush, and he said he went to the hospital to see Bill Casey, and he was in an oxygen tent, couldn't say a word, but somehow the day Woodward got there, he got out, sat up in the chair, and talked for 8 hours, and exposed all the secrets of the CIA. Yeah. It was amazing.
Which, knowing Bill Casey, was not the most likely.
Well, as you know, with Bill Casey, also, you had no idea what he was saying when he was talking to you.
Exactly, even when he was healthy.
He mumbled, even
when he was healthy.
I met him one night. He came over to my apartment one night. I swear to God, I have no idea what the man said to me for an hour and a half.
Yes, he was economic undersecretary when I was Secretary of State, and that was my weakest subject. And I had a terrible time with him because where I needed most instruction, I couldn't understand.
That's funny.
What my chief aide was saying.
What would you have been if you didn't have this brain and go into government? What would you have liked to? Would you like to be a movie star or a cowboy? Or when you first came here at 15, what was in your brain about?
Well, when I came here at 15...
You were escaping the
Nazis. And I had to work in a shaving brush factory. And I had to go to high school at night and to college at night. And I studied accounting in college. So I suppose if things had worked their normal course and if I hadn't gone into the army, I would have wound up as a mediocre accountant.
You'd have been on your way to prison with half these guys on Wall Street.
It certainly didn't occur to me that I'd wind up as Secretary of State.
You did not?
No. How could it? I mean...
What were you like in those days? Were you... now, I know Henry and I have a lot in common. We love food. We're both good-looking. We're known as ladies' men. Before you got married, you were big ladies' men. I mean, before you got married. Were you that way in college? Were you shy, or were you...
Well, I didn't go to college, for one thing. I came here and worked in a factory. And then I went to college after the war.
Went to Harvard?
To Harvard, when I was already older than most college kids. I was, strangely enough, shy. I was very conscious of my accent, and I was not a great ladies' man.
What was the best line you ever used on a lady to pick her up, to get her to go out on a date? What's the best thing you ever said? Because you got a great voice. I mean, it is arresting, you know, but I mean...
Well, maybe when people called me a sex symbol, I said, now, if I bore you, it's your fault.
That's right. They called you a sex symbol back then. Let me go back now to that time in Do you miss the action, by the way? Do you miss
No,
it because you've got a big private business, and I know a lot of world leaders call you to get the opinion of what's going on.
I'm not without contact with.
Right, I know that. I know that you're plugged in.
Yeah, so no, I don't miss it.
You don't miss it.
No, it's when you're in Washington, that most outsiders don't understand. There are many columnists that maybe 2% of the American people know, but 100% of the Washingtonians know.
Mm-hmm.
And so you go into your office, you open the newspaper, and you read some columnist, and your primary concern is, where did this come from? I mean, who is the enemy who's trying to get me?
Been in those meetings, yeah.
So you get a totally skewed view of the world, and to do this for 8 years, day after day, it's endless.
Yeah. What is the biggest threat to our country?
Well, first of all, we are the best functioning country in the world with all our troubles. And we have the people that is most cohesive, again, with all the problems we have. Our difficulty is that we're now living in a world for which we have very little historical preparation. We've always been able to be isolated. We've never had powerful neighbors. We have always been able, I'm talking about foreign policy now, we've always been able to withdraw or to engage as we saw fit. Now we're in a world of instantaneous communication. An economic crisis in Mexico can threaten the whole world system. And to get ourselves used to this proposition is difficult, and there's a danger then that we will lose the capacity to shape those events on which our prosperity and security depends.
How important is it for us to pick a man for president, I've got 30 seconds to break here, who is strong in foreign policy? This last election, when they got rid of George Bush, they felt that it was unimportant. Should the American people balance in 50-50, domestic policy, foreign policy with the...
I think you need a president who understands enough about foreign policy so that not every problem is a new problem, and so that he can distinguish between China and Mexico and
he doesn't
Europe.
have to have somebody point out where China is on the map. We'll be back in just a moment with Dr. Henry Kissinger. Stay with us.
I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president at that hour in this office.
Very interesting to see that tape again. I worked with Richard Nixon. You worked with Richard Nixon. I was surprised he held himself together that day as well as he did, because I guess behind the scenes he was crumbling at that time, wasn't he?
He was shaken, as you would expect. He had spent his whole life really disciplining himself for that position, and then it crashed down around him.
Did he have a fatal character flaw? Was there some? Because I know that he was one of the smartest presidents we've had.
Without any doubt. And one of the most knowledgeable about foreign affairs.
Right.
And for all I know about others, but I just know about
Actually,
foreign
it's
affairs.
interesting, if you look historically at his domestic policy, it
Turned out to be very farsighted.
It was very progressive and farsighted, and it will take another generation for people to really understand But as a person, what was the problem?
The problem was, whether it was inherent in him or whether his life had made him that way, he had an almost morbid fear of being rejected. And every move he made was designed to avoid rejection. So all these complicated maneuvers were really essentially defensive in nature. And he had great difficulty facing people that disagreed with him. He had no difficulty. When I learned this, I did most of my work with him. I saw him a lot, but most of the real work was done by memo. And he had no difficulty at all reacting to a memo and turning it down or modifying it. But he could not totally trust anybody except his family. And so he created a very strange atmosphere around himself. But he was an outstanding president.
Today, if you had a guy, you'd say he did not get hugged enough as a child. He did not feel secure.
You see, I don't know enough about his childhood, but he certainly did not feel secure in human relationships. And in fact, I ended the first volume of my memoir saying, what would have happened if the establishment, which he both admired and distrusted, had shown him some love? Would it have broken the spell, or would he have withdrawn more deeply? That's the unanswerable question.
He once said something to me that was quite interesting. I asked him what the hardest part of being a politician was, and he said, for me, it's going down to the breakfast table, opening the morning paper, and seeing a horrendous, ugly cartoon of yourself and trying to explain to your children, Julie and Tricia, why people hate you. He said that was the hardest part for him.
Yes, but he did outstanding, often heroic things.
What do you think of LBJ? New book out inside the White House says that it's not very flattering to LBJ.
Well, but there are all these people. I knew him, but I did not work with LBJ.
Right.
But here was an American original, and he had some of the same insecurities as Nixon. He greatly admired the Kennedy entourage. And then the people that he most wanted to admire him all turned on him. So he became somewhat paranoid. He was dragged into a war that he had reason to believe his predecessor had started. And I think LBJ is a great human tragedy. And you know, when you pick out the personal idiosyncrasies of people and don't put them in the context of the total relationship, it's easy to knock anybody off his pedestal.
That's why we're destroying so many leaders and so many people are afraid to step up to the plate, I think. I mean, we're going to end up by tearing them all down and getting weak.
It's certainly
leaders.
a major commitment these days to enter public life, because you can wind up being totally destroyed.
You better not do anything wrong after you steal bubble gum when you're 9 years old, because they'll get it and they'll pin you.
But you can
wall.
even, I mean, a lot of the so-called credibility gaps. The man who said he saw a light at the end of the tunnel did see a light at the end of the tunnel. He was wrong. Mm-hmm. He wasn't a liar.
Right.
I mean, when you are at high levels, and this was in the Johnson administration, so I'm not defending what happened when I was in government. All the issues that get to a president or secretary of state are 50.5 against 49.5. So they're all very close. And if then you have to be examined into every nuance of how you interpreted them, it becomes, over time, an enormous drain.
You're very astute politically. What do you think's going on the Republican side lining up for the election with Bill Clinton? Let me rattle off some names. You give me a quick reaction to them. Phil Gramm.
No, I tell you, I've decided that I will passionately support whoever gets nominated.
Really?
But I'm not going to get involved
early
in the nominating process.
Well, you like Pete Wilson.
Well, I like all of them from that point of view.
Bob Dole.
I've known them. They all have their own qualities.
What's Clinton's biggest weakness? You'll support any of the Republicans that get nominated. What's his biggest weakness?
His biggest weakness is that he doesn't really know what he wants. Or, I would even go further, he may know what he wants, but he hasn't the willpower to see it through. And in my view, he doesn't understand foreign policy particularly well.
Although he's had no foreign policy disasters, has he?
No, but he is sort of creating an atmosphere in which our capacity to lead is eroding. And I think he surrounded himself with a group of people who would have been better off going to school a little longer.
Somebody said they needed adult supervision.
Yeah.
If the country needed you, would you give up all the money you're making and go back into public service?
I have no desire to go into public service, and what I would much rather do is do one specific limited mission when a president needs one. But on the other hand, if you've been in public service, to say you will not respond to a president is arrogant. But I would prefer not to be asked.
One of the little-known facts about you is you're a pretty funny guy, actually, as a public speaker.
Even sometimes when I intend to be.
Is it a true story that you used to say, why does nobody try to steal my briefcase? I'm the guy with all the secrets?
No, what I said was, I've seen all these movies with beautiful spies coming after you, and here I have all the secrets, and no beautiful spy has ever come after me.
Well, all right, we've got to wrap it up there. Coming up next is Willard. Do you know Willard Scott? Would you ever be a weatherman? You'd be a great weatherman.
I've been a weatherman.
You've been a weatherman? Come in here, Willard. Say hello to him on camera, and we'll go to a break. This 3-shot will be something. Come around behind the table.
I've spoken with Willard in Palm.
Come around this way,
Willard.
Beach. Good to see you.
Huh? The greatest man that ever lived. I don't think it is. Truly, Washington.
I competed with him. I did the weather for CBS one morning.
You held us up on price, though. We were going to get you. CBS gave you $50.
Okay.
I screwed it up totally.
Henry?
I do that and make a fortune.
No, I didn't know which direction to point. You know, I didn't know that they were reversed.
Okay, folks, we'll be back with Willard Scott. Thank you to Henry Kissinger. Stay with us.